Thank you. Thank you very much for your warm welcome, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I think that I hope that the interpretation is working so that everybody can understand me. My Spanish is really not good enough to be able to speak to you in Spanish today, but I am very happy to be able to present to you where we are in the process of the development of the UNESCO recommendation of open science, what is in the current text of the recommendation, and what do we see as the major opportunities and challenges for the future. So if you allow me, I will just start the presentation now. And maybe just to start, to put in the context a little bit, why are we interested in open science in UNESCO? Well, it is because of the S in UNESCO. UNESCO is the UN agency for education, science, communication, culture and communication. And of course, S stands for science. So open science as an important movement, of course, is of great importance for UNESCO. Because of the SDGs also, meaning that we've seen over and over that increased access to scientific information, to scientific data, can be an important accelerator towards the achievement of sustainable development goals. Also because of the human rights, because we see in open science a potential tool for fulfillment of the human right to science. And also because UNESCO has an amazing convening power. It has the capacity of bringing different countries together, bringing different stakeholders together in the field of science, bringing them together and setting new norms and international standards around science. So it has the convening power and the normative power, particularly in the context of open science. And indeed, it is important in the context of open science to talk about norms for open science, because we've seen that in the past few years, there has been a lot of different initiatives on open science in different parts of the world, through different communities at different level, individual, institutional, national, or regional. But we actually, at the international level, do not have any policy framework for open science. We do not have a common definition of what open science means, nor how are we supposed to implement open science practices in a just and equitable way. So that is the reason why in 2019, at the last General Conference of UNESCO, and the General Conference is where all the 193 member states of UNESCO come together. So in November 2019, our member states asked UNESCO to develop an international standard setting instrument on open science in the form of a UNESCO recommendation on open science. Now, what are UNESCO recommendations? These are legal instruments in which the General Conference formulates principles and norms for the international regulation of a particular question. In this sense, it's going to be on open science. And then it invites member states who have adopted the recommendation to take whatever legislative or other step that is needed to apply these principles and norms in their respective territories. So it is not a legally binding document per se, but it is a document, an instrument that is of high moral authority and political authority, and it is supposed to influence national strategies and legislations around open science in different countries. So the way the draft recommendation has been produced so far was through a very broad, consultative, inclusive, transparent process. Our member states were very keen on the fact that there are different views of open science, there are different actors that are involved, and it was very important for us to gather all of these different perspectives and try to construct a draft text that will be reflective of all of these different perspectives. So we've carried out a broad range of consultations at the regional level, different thematic level, etc. And based on these inputs, we have produced a first draft, which then went for comments to member states and other actors. And it was also negotiated at an intergovernmental meeting, which took place online, and partly here in UNESCO in May this year. And what was interesting in this intergovernmental meeting, where more than 100 governments appointed their legal and technical experts, and they negotiated the text there, was that there was really a very big push from different member states to come up with an agreement, to come up with a consensus document, to move this agenda forward, because there really was a feeling that open science is something that is really needed, and an international framework is absolutely critical at this stage of developments in open science. So what do we see in the draft text of the recommendation for the moment? As I said, the aim of the recommendation really is to provide an international policy framework, both for policy and practice of open science, with the core objective to use open science as a tool to reduce the science, technology, innovation gaps between and within countries. So this is really at the heart of the recommendation, making sure that open science is a new way of doing science, which makes sure that everybody has access to scientific information, and that open science really bridges these gaps in knowledge between and within countries. The recommendation outlines a common definition of open science, a set of shared values and principles, and some actions that are conducive to a fair and equitable operationalization of open science for everybody. So in terms of the, yeah. Would you like me to go back? Okay, sorry. And I'll try to speak slower also, if that's going to be useful for you as well. So as I said, the recommendation, the draft text of the recommendation outlines a common definition of open science, a shared set of values and principles, as well as some actions for fair and equitable operationalization of open science for all. With regards to the definition, the member states agreed for the moment on a relatively broad definition of open science that really brings all the different elements of open science together. And it is now defined as a combination of different movements and practices which increase scientific collaborations and sharing of information for the benefits both of science and of the society. Also, it's a combination of movements and practices that make multilingual scientific knowledge openly available, accessible, and reusable for everybody, and opens the process of scientific knowledge creation, evaluation, and communication to societal actors beyond the traditional scientific community. So the important part here is to say open science is science that is more open among and for scientists, but also is opening towards society more broadly. And so in this context, the different key pillars of open science as they are defined right now in the recommendation are open scientific knowledge. And here, under the open scientific knowledge, we have open access to scientific publications, open research data, open educational resources, open source software and source code, and open hardware. Then a whole part on open science infrastructures, both virtual and physical, shared infrastructures. Open engagement of societal actors, which was a very interesting new element that was added to the open science definition. And it brings together different initiatives around citizen and participatory science, scientific volunteering, crowdsourcing, crowdfunding. So all of these different actions and activities that bring other societal actors closer to science. And then a part on this open dialogue with other knowledge systems, in particular, indigenous knowledge holders, marginalized scholars, or local communities. So once again, very well. So maybe I can start with the open engagement of societal actors. Sure. Okay. No problem at all. So we have, as I said, open scientific knowledge with different elements that are part of the open scientific knowledge, open science infrastructures, open engagement of societal actors. And this open engagement of societal actors was a very important and new element that was added in the open science definition. And it brings together the different activities and initiatives around citizen science, around participatory science, about scientific volunteering, crowdsourcing or crowdfunding, or any other activity that really engages other societal actors beyond the traditional scientific community in the process of making science. And then there is another part also opening to society, and there is this open dialogue with other knowledge systems, in particular with indigenous knowledge holders, with indigenous peoples who hold traditional and indigenous knowledge, marginalized scholars, and also local communities. So again, even from this definition of key elements or key pillars of open science, we see that there is a broad area of different elements and actors that need to come together for open science to work for everybody. As I said, one of the most important parts of the recommendation, besides the definition, of course, is this set of common values and principles, because in a way, this is the heart of open science, and each and every open science practice should follow these values and principles. So in terms of values, the draft recommendation for the moment, the draft recommendation recognizes quality and integrity as a principal value of open science, collective benefit, equity and fairness, diversity and inclusiveness. And then in terms of principles, we have a range of different principles such as transparency, scrutiny, critique, reproducibility, equality of opportunities for all, responsibility, accountability, collaboration, inclusion, flexibility, and sustainability. So all these principles are there and values to really describe the way in which open science should be done. And again, with the view of making sure that open science is there to bridge the gaps in knowledge, in science, technology, and innovation between developed and developing countries, and also within countries themselves. These principles and values also recognize the diversity of different actors in open science, from scientists to librarians, to academia, to younger researchers, but also, as I said, citizen science, volunteers, etc., publishers, data curators, etc., repositories. So the recommendation really gives a voice in a way to all these different actors of open science. It does recognize that there are, depending on the scientific discipline, also that there needs to be some flexibility with regards to the way open science will be applied. And also there is recognition that not all the countries start from the same starting point. So there is a little bit of flexibility in the approaches to open science. But again, no matter how flexible one is, at the end of the day, any open science practice should go along with these values and principles. And as I said, there is a set of 7 areas of action that have also been identified in the draft recommendation as priority actions. These include promotion of a common understanding of open science, developing of an enabling policy environment, investing in human resources and capacity building, in infrastructures and services, promotion of a cooperation at different levels, from individual level to national, regional, and international level, promotion of innovative approaches for doing science, because open science does not only apply to the end products of science, but really to the entire scientific process. And that's where a lot of these innovative approaches come into play as well. And then fostering a general culture of open science within all the different open science actors. And as I said, under each and every of these areas of action, there is a set of recommendations for member states, for governments, for some other actors. So what are the key opportunities with open science more broadly, and also that may come, of course, through the implementation of the recommendation? Open science, as we said, can increase access to knowledge and improve the quality and efficiency of the entire scientific process. So it has the potential to make the scientific process more transparent, more inclusive, more democratic, and more responsive to the needs of society. So as I said, not only at the level of publications and access to publications or data, but really at all the different stages of the scientific process, including data collection, data analysis, peer review, publication, distribution, use, hypothesis, etc. So the entire scientific process is prone to open science practice. Then, as we said, open science is really increasingly recognized as a critical SDGs accelerator. And we also saw through the COVID crisis how important it is to have timely, available, affordable access, free or affordable access to information, how important it is to share information, to collaborate across borders and across disciplines, how important it is to communicate science to the outside world and to communicate between science and policy. So because of all of these different elements, open science really does have the potential to increase the role of science in achieving development objectives of different nations, including the Sustainable Development Goals as defined by the United Nations. And then last but not least, open science really can be a game changer in bridging the science technology innovation gaps and also in fulfilling the human right to science. However, as I said, there are some key challenges, and even these key challenges are mentioned and addressed in a way in the recommendation. An important thing will be to actually change the conventional scientific culture, to change the way in which conventionally scientists work. It's okay. I can start again with the key challenges. Okay, with this slide, no problem at all. And apologies if I speak too fast. I just get carried away. So as I said, there are some, of course, opportunities, but also some challenges to the implementation of open science practices and future implementation possibly of the open science recommendation. One is that there is need to change the conventional scientific culture. There is need to change the way in which normally scientists work. So the competition needs to be changed with collaboration. The sharing of data and the sharing of information has to become something that is really enshrined in the scientific culture. There needs to be a lot of capacity building at different levels. And there really needs to be investment in human resources for open science. Of course, the importance of adequate infrastructures, including reliable internet connectivity. If we really do want open science to bridge the gaps between and within nations in terms of science, technology, and innovation, it has to go hand in hand with ensuring reliable internet connectivity for all. Another important point, which is particularly important for young scientists who are very keen on open science and on sharing, and I think they're very much used to sharing more than maybe more advanced scientists are, but the young scientists really do want to share, but they are concerned because for the moment, the incentives for open science and the way that the scientific careers are evaluated are not necessarily always in line with open science principles. So this is something that needs to be changed on the institutional level and on other levels, and we need to try together to find ways to valorize careers based on open science principles. And then there is a risk of commercial monopolization of research data, and therefore the recommendation calls for long-term sustainable not-for-profit infrastructures and services that support open science. Okay. No problem. So the last challenge is the risk of commercial monopolization of research data. And therefore, the recommendation really calls for long-term, sustainable, not-for-profit infrastructures and services that support open science. So it's important to invest again in these services that support open science, which are not for profit, so that we do not run into the problem of commercialization or commercial monopolization of research data. Another challenge, which is not on this slide, but is important, is to build together a monitoring framework for both open science and for the recommendation. So when the recommendation is adopted, or when member states adopt the recommendation, they also need to then report back to UNESCO every 4 years on what they have done in terms of implementing the recommendation. And they did ask us to develop a monitoring framework that is flexible enough that they could use to report back. And we are hoping to have another consultative process to build this monitoring framework, because at the same time, it will be used both to monitor, but also to implement the recommendation. And the idea is really that the monitoring of this recommendation is used for countries to share best practices, to share their lessons learned, to exchange on what can be done, what is being done, what works, what doesn't work, rather than to report back on specific numbers of how many open access journals or open access articles they have. So this monitoring, we are hopeful that could really help countries exchange at different levels, whether regional or international level, or also at the level of the different communities which are part of their open science ecosystems. So in terms of next steps, as we heard in this November, so in a month time, the UNESCO General Conference may meet again here in Paris, and they will consider this draft text of the recommendation. And we are hoping that they will also be able to adopt the recommendation. So if the recommendation is adopted, then the implementation, of course, would have to follow immediately. And we will have an implementation plan to share with member states and partners already in December to see a little bit what are the key areas of implementation where some focus needs to be put. And then, as I said, the monitoring framework will be developed as one of the important parts moving forward. So just like with the development of this draft text, we really are hopeful that if the recommendation is adopted, it will be really useful for the promotion of fair and just open science practices. It will be useful for the scientists, for the society, to take better and more advantage of science and to do better science. And we are hoping that there will be feedbacks again from different regions, including from Latin America, which has been a driver in particular during the consultation process that led to this draft recommendation. So I think I will thank you, and I will stop here, and I'll be very happy to respond to any questions that there may be from the audience. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias a la doctora Persic por su fabulosa intervención. Vamos entonces ahora a conocer si tenemos algunas preguntas de nuestro público. Podemos esperar entonces que nuestra producción nos deje saber si tenemos algunas preguntas. Ok, entonces aquí parece que tenemos... Ok. Entonces, solo para confirmar, Juan, ¿me estás escuchando? Juan Castillo. Perfecto, perfectamente. Estamos entonces al aire con la doctora y ya podemos hacerle las preguntas de nuestro público. Perfecto. Paola es miembro del equipo de organizador del evento, sin embargo, es la persona que nos está compartiendo a esta hora las preguntas. Si te parece, yo te comparto y tú se las dejas saber a la doctora Ana. Vamos, Juan, ¿cómo proteger las innovaciones, los desarrollos tecnológicos en el marco de la ciencia abierta?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. That's a very good question. And actually, in a way, open science and innovations go hand to hand, hand in hand. The important thing to say is that open science really promotes sharing of information and collaborations in the way of improving the quality of science, improving the way in which we can also verify scientific advancements, and in which we can advance in certain areas. Of course, when we come to the commercialization of science, this is not an area that the recommendation is actually covering. However, the recommendation really does say that there is no frictions between the intellectual property regimes and open science practices. And there are different ways in which, of course, open science and innovation can go hand in hand. And actually, one of the things that we see is that by opening more information and having more access to different types of information, there is more field for innovation. So because by opening access to information, one can have more availability of ideas and collaborations, etc. But as I said, in terms of then commercial exploitation of certain data, etc., there are of course the rules that will still have to apply, and the recommendation is not dwelling into that part of scientific information. One thing that is important also is that the recommendation does not say all information has to be open for everyone all the time. So it's kind of open by default. However, certain restrictions to openness may apply. And these are based on, for example, the conservation of privacy, of security, etc., but also intellectual property and other regimes, sacred knowledge from indigenous peoples, etc. So there are different instances in which the information would not be openly, freely shared for everyone with all communities. But even in those instances, some communities may still decide to share information under specific rules and regulations. Again, opening up does not mean sharing information without any regulation at all. And it actually gives more responsibilities both to those who provide information and to those who use information. I hope this answers the question asked by Paula.
Listo, muchísimas gracias, doctora Ana. Juan, vamos con la siguiente. Tenemos 4 preguntas aquí. Y la segunda sería, ¿cuál sería la lógica de financiación de la ciencia abierta?
So I don't hear my translator, but I understand that the question is about the financing of open science. Okay, great. So, well, one of the things that is mentioned in the recommendation is really a call for member states, for governments to invest in science, to invest in science with at least 1% of GDP dedicated to science. This may be a small amount for some countries. It is still a threshold which has not been reached by many different countries. So already just more investment in science is something that the recommendation is calling for. And in that vein, while investing in science, investment should be diverted in a way towards open science practices as well. And while there needs to be possibly additional investment for open science, the idea with open science is that eventually the costs might be reduced, because by opening more data, understanding more who is doing what, the duplication rates are going to be decreased. The way in which certain information is shared and therefore advances knowledge at a higher pace will also be the premise for additional investment than in open science practices. So the studies that exist out there right now show that yes, there needs to be additional investment in open science, but that hopefully with time, the idea is that that investment would eventually pay off, because the publications would be reduced, because the scientific enterprise would be more efficient and would actually be better and with better quality for the same amounts that are invested in it. But independently of investment in open science, the investment in open science is something that needs to happen, and it needs to happen for every single country in the world.
Muchas gracias. Vamos con la siguiente pregunta. ¿Qué tan dispuestas estarían las instituciones para hacer ciencia abierta y poner a disposición datos, protocolos, resultados, etcétera?
Well, the thing is that it is already happening. It is not something, the recommendation will not necessarily start this movement. The recommendation, what it does is to put an international framework, values and principles for how this should happen and who and how benefits from it. So we already see that institutions are opening their data, because it's obviously in their interest to open their data. The movement itself started from scientists themselves who wanted better access to, whether it's publications or to data, or also this engagement with society more broadly. So without just thinking about, access to publications and data, one needs to see open science in a broader context. The funders are already aligning in saying, yes, indeed. I mean, particularly publicly funded research should be available. I mean, it is something that the citizens have already paid for in a way. So therefore, they need to have access to it as well. So while there will be some incentives for certain institutions, as I said, the movement generally is towards opening of data, particularly when it comes to publicly funded institutions and research institutions in general. And those yes, I was just saying that it is important that there already is existing, there already is a lot of institutions, including universities, etc., and other institutions that are opening their data and their publications more and more, and the funders are aligning around the concept of open science more and more.
Vamos con la siguiente pregunta. Doctora Ana, ¿se plantea la apertura de patentes de las vacunas frente a la pandemia y la propiedad intelectual con base en las afectaciones de producción y la necesidad confirmada basada en los derechos humanos?
I'm sorry, can you just repeat the question one more time? Uh-huh. I'm not sure if I completely understood the question. I understand the question is around the patents and intellectual property around patents for vaccines, and in relation to that, right? Yeah. Yeah, I think the response from kind of the UNESCO perspective is that, of course, it is a right of everybody to be able to, as I said, to benefit from the scientific advancements. It's the Article 27 of the Human Rights Declaration. The question of patents, the question of patents and vaccines in the context of the pandemic, as you know, has been discussed in different forums of the United Nations and others. It was WTO, the World Trade Organization, WIPO, the Intellectual Property Organization. On the UNESCO side, of course, we are supportive of any improvement of access to these vaccines for everybody, because, as we said, until everybody's vaccinated, nobody is safe. So we see our movement of open science also contributing to this broader fulfillment of human right to benefits from scientific progress and science more broadly. I hope that's response to the question.
Muchas gracias. Y vamos con la última que nos dice, ¿qué tan dispuestas estarían las instituciones para hacer ciencia abierta? Ok, esta ya la realizamos. Permítame, encontramos acá. Ok. Si se hacen visibles las estadísticas o los datos bases del proyecto de investigación, ¿se mantiene la autoría de esos datos? ¿De qué forma?
Yes, I can hear you now. Sorry, I'm just waiting for the translation. So as I say, when we define the different open data or open scientific publications, open access to scientific publications, we do mention, of course, the idea of different types of licensing, and I think this is where the question is going. There are different types of licensing that allow for sharing of data and making data accessible while still acknowledging the authors and the original holders of the data. So there are different types under which the data can be shared, including, of course, in the context of open science. And the recommendation, of course, does not recommend precisely which licenses to use and how, but it does give an idea of what is out there that is compatible with, let's say, open science and in what terms. And then, as I said, there are different organizations working on these issues today, including those working on intellectual property issues, looking at different types of licensing and how that can be best used in the context of open science, sharing of data, and maintaining the rights of the original authors.
Ok, muchísimas gracias. Tenemos una última pregunta, doctora Ana, y dice, si es tan costoso hacer ciencia, ¿quién y cómo se puede financiar las investigaciones para dejarlas abiertas?
Well, I'm not sure if it is so expensive to do science. I think it's a matter of, you know, priorities for governments, for institutions, for actors. It is an investment, but there is a lot of return on this particular investment. And particularly today, when we are dealing with issues where the solutions are all embedded in some kind of scientific technological solution, investment in science really is investment in solving the problems and the issues that different countries and nations and individuals are facing. So, and in that context, if it is in an open context, it even accelerates further knowledge, advancement of knowledge, sharing of information, etc. Again, we have seen with the COVID-19 pandemics what can happen when scientists work together and share data and information from the beginning. I mean, the fact that we had a vaccine within a year was just amazing, and it is possible, and it can be done also for some other issues beyond this particular health issue. We have climate change problems, we have biodiversity loss. I just see the picture behind our moderator, but you know, these are all the issues that require a lot of data, a lot of collaboration between scientists. So if we can strengthen that, And if investment can be done in that rather than in something else, then it's definitely worth it. And as I said, I was just in another seminar recently where they said science is not a privilege. Science today is something that you need to have solutions for to understand the world around you and have solutions to the problems that are there.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias a la doctora Ana por su interesantísima intervención en nuestro evento. Continuamos entonces con nuestra agenda. No sé si la doctora Ana quiera regalarnos algunas palabras de despedida.
I understand. I've lost the interpretation. Yes, I can hear you now. Sorry, excuse me. I think we had a very good conversation, very frank also conversation. I think these are the questions that people are asking going forward with open science. But in a way, I think for us, what we see is that this is how science should be done. We call it open science today because we kind of closed science in the past somehow through the years. But sharing of information, working together is what really forms the basis of science. So it may seem like a new concept, but it's actually something that has been around for a while. And again, there are regions, including Latin America, that really do demonstrate how this can be done very elegantly and how it can be worth it for everybody involved. So thank you again for the invitation, and I hope you have good rest of your discussions. And again, if there is anything, any questions or any additional ideas, thoughts, I'd be very happy to continue connecting with you by email.